Dr. Shahid, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Would you tell us about your new report? Give us a little bit insight. What's the theme and what's been discussed in the new report?
Well, thank you for inviting me to this talk.
My pleasure.
My report, which is due now, speaks about mainly the events that has happened in Iran for the past 6 months. And my primary focus is, of course, on the situation of reporters or the whole context of freedom of expression, and how many journalists feel that that they are being targeted for persecution. I've had complaints from a number of sources, including journalists, about harassment of themselves or their families, as well as those linked to international news organizations, such as the VOA or the BBC, in terms of families of those working for VOA or the BBC. I'm also concerned about the situation of human rights defenders. A number of very prominent persons facing lengthy sentences, prison terms. And the worry I have is that typically when a country has problems with journalists, it means it's got a huge story to hide. That's the typical symptom of this, and that is the case with Iran as well. And in the further case of human rights defenders, that means the means people have to defend their rights, for due process rights, are being whittled away. So these are, if you like, sort of serious concerns that I have. My report also speaks about the new penal code and some of my concerns about the draft new penal code, and how it expands capital offences and how it doesn't address some of the expectations that we had about the draft penal code when the work on this was started. I'm also very concerned about the status of women, how women continue to suffer in Iran, as well as religious and ethnic minorities, including Christians, the Muslim minorities, and the Baha'is in particular, as well as the ethnic minorities very often feel the brunt of the difficulties Iran has on human rights. So these are broadly, in summary form, some of the main issues that I raise in my report. Of course, I continue with my concerns about high rate of executions and also torture in prison.
Could you expand a little bit on the situation of women in universities? It's been highlighted by so many journalists and news agencies, and it's been discussed, and it's been going on. Iran reject the whole thing, and then we see the data are coming that shows Iran's claim is not right, and it's actually happening. What's your understanding? What do you get?
Well, I had even earlier expressed concern about the closing of access or the difficulties of access to women to universities, and at that point was about the imposition of quotas on women students, as well as they've been forced to take evening classes or fee-paying classes. So, in other words, at that point it was a question of quotas. My current report was written ahead of the question of the ban by many faculties on women students. So my report doesn't address that. But I am concerned about these reports, and I have written to the government of Iran inquiring further about the nature of these impediments, and of course reminding them of the obligations under international law on gender equality. So I shall perhaps wait to hear from the government of Iran as to their version of what is happening, and I hope that I have the feedback from the government of Iran before I go to present my report at the General Assembly on 24th of October. But I do share the serious concerns that have been raised in the media about a number of faculties in Iran not providing access to women to study at those universities.
How about the executions? You mentioned the executions. Are you making any recommendation in your report about this? This is a serious issue that is going on in Iran.
Well, the number of executions recorded last year in my reports was over 700. And of course, this year the number I have been able to document is less, but still quite high. And I have repeatedly called for a moratorium on the death penalty. I've also repeatedly written in my reports that many of the offences for which death penalty is imposed does not meet the international criterion of being a grave crime. About 80% of those who were executed last year were people who had committed drug offences, and drug offences do not, you know, conform to the standard of a grave offence under international law. So I have called upon Iran on the question of moratorium on death penalty, on the question of review of these capital offences, as well as I have raised my concerns about the lack of due process rights in the trials. Too often I get complaints that the trial standards did not meet the requirements of due process rights. For example, they may not have access to legal counsel at the investigation stage. The defense lawyer may not have access to the files until very late, or they may never get access, or they may not know beforehand the witnesses who give testimony against them, or have an opportunity to cross-examine them. In many cases, I've been told that with verifiable, evidence, that trials may have lasted a few minutes before, a very draconian sentence may have been handed out. So I have raised concerns about these issues and called for a moratorium on death penalty.
One positive development was the release of Pastor Naderi. Could you tell us why this issue dealt with this, Iranian government dealt with this case with this so complexity, and then what was the reason for this late release and changing the whole accusation against Pastor Naderi?
Well, first of all, I am very happy that he has been freed. I am quite relieved that he has been released, and I do commend the government of Iran for having done that. This judiciary not still is commendable action to have him freed. There was a lot of concern expressed at the last council, Human Rights Council in Geneva, by a number of delegations about the sentence handed out to Pastor Naderi, which was at the time death sentence. And a number of delegations spoke on the subject. And on the day, I was pleased to hear from Mr. Larjani that he was not going to face a death sentence, and that of course he explained on that day that his alleged offence was that he was proselytizing, and of course there are a number of laws and relating to that, of course, also the right to practice one's faith. So I am not exactly sure why in the first place he had to face that charge, and I do believe that the release of the pastor was in response to the international concern that was raised after his situation, because you can judge that from the response given by Mr. Larjani at the council. He clearly was responding to that, to those criticisms, and he was trying to explain that those criticisms are not warranted. So I would like to see Iran, review its blasphemy laws so that people can practice their faith without falling foul of the law.
So you think you and yourself and your report played a role in this case?
Well, religious freedom is a fundamental tenet of international law, and Iran has signed on to ICCPR, and therefore it is obligated to uphold that principle. I do think that international concern expressed on the subject, and my report is part of that, I think did play an important role. And however small that role may be, my view is that international community must continue to be vigilant against abuses, and must clearly speak out or voices concern when there are abuses in Iran. So I think the lesson to be drawn from Pastor Naderi's case is that that countries should voice out their concerns to Iran, and Iran should respond to this in a favorable manner. I am also sure that there would have been delegations who would have spoken to Iran even bilaterally, because religious freedom is a global concern, and a large number of countries would therefore have spoken to Iran both on record and off record, and I think Iran was sensible to see that this was an emblematic case on a very serious concern.
The report released in March stated that the Islamic, I'm quoting your report, the Islamic Republic of Iran possessed the basic legislative framework and tools to promote and respect for human rights. How does the UN go about making sure that Iran abides by its own rules and laws and legislations?
Well, two comments. First of all, that comment is yes. Basically, by and large, Iran does have the legal framework to ensure that its people are respected. Of course, there are exceptions, but by and large, I think a large number of the concerns we have would disappear if Iran would enforce rule of law. I mean, there are laws about fair trials, there are laws about legal representation, there are laws about religious freedom. If all these things were respected, then of course a large part of the concerns would disappear. That's the first point I wish to make about that. How does UN enforce this? Of course, Iran is party to a number of conventions. These have treaty bodies which review them. I think the reviews must be clear on what Iran should do and must give definite timeframes on how these have to be done. Now, last year in October, the Human Rights Committee reviewed Iran and they had a number of recommendations. I think 30 plus concluding observations are made, and they would have identified 4 themes for Iran to respond immediately. I think it's important for the committee and for the human rights mission in the UN to follow up on those recommendations and see how Iran is observing these. 4 years ago, Iran had the Universal Periodic Review of the country, and by next February, the 4-year time would have 2 years from now would have run. So I think it's important that by 2014 that we urge Iran, we have enough, if you like, interact with Iran to see there's transparency on what's been done, and that Iran continues to keep on doing those measures. But the progress so far has been disappointing. If you look at the penal code review, I don't think the new penal code actually measures up to the expectations we had of a review. So what we can do is, speak to Iran about this, highlight deficiencies, and engage with Iran on how they may be addressed. I think the answer is more scrutiny, more transparency, and more engagement. It will be critical on Iran's part to engage with the UN machinery on finding the way forward. It has not invited a single rapporteur to Iran for a long time. It hasn't even invited me to come into the country. But this sort of engagement is just the kind of confidence building measure that we will have that Iran is serious about moving forward with human rights progress.
Any development in terms of Iran's cooperation after Secretary General Ban Ki-moon trips to Tehran?
Well, that was quite a recent visit, so perhaps we should not judge in the time frame whether or not anything has happened. But no, there hasn't been any developments on cooperation with regard to human rights mechanisms in Iran since the visit. But I'm happy that during his visit he did, speak out frankly about the concerns that the UN has about Iran's human rights record. Now, at the debate on 24th of October in the third committee in the UN, I would hope Iran would speak more about what it can do in terms of engagement with the UN machinery on human rights. I think it's crucial that the country mandate holder is allowed entry into the country and given cooperation. Now, I am happy that this time for my report, Iran did give extensive comments. They gave very lengthy comments to my report, but the comments did not address in many occasions substantively the allegations being made. So I think what would really be good would be arrangement in which Iran does actually respond to specific allegations that are made. I've sent a number of urgent appeals and communication letters to Iran. A large number remain unanswered. So I think that communication must increase, and we have an opportunity in October, 24th October, to review that process of cooperation. And and each year, of course, the General Assembly considers a certain amount of country-specific resolutions which speak to the issues and worries the UN has about a country. And I think if the resolution again goes forward, there would be a section which speaks about the need for greater cooperation between Iran and the UN human rights machinery, primarily the country mandate holder.
Have you discussed the outcome of Secretary General trip and Jeffrey Feltman trip to Tehran in terms of what has been achieved on human rights?
No, I haven't had a formal discussion with the Secretary General. I hope to be able to meet him when I come here for my report's presentation. But his visit, what was achieved in that has percolated down to me through the UN machinery. And of course, he did, of course, raise the issue of my visit. And we have these public comments which are quite clear as to his concerns about Iran's human rights situation.
So are you hopeful that it might open up an opportunity for you to go to Iran?
I'm always hopeful. Iran is a member of the United Nations. Iran is also currently chairman of the non-aligned movement. Iran seeks election to UN offices, and Iran has voluntarily signed on to a number of UN conventions. These obligate Iran to uphold certain rights, and I'm hopeful that Iran would realize that that cooperation is in their interest.
If they ever invite you to go to Iran, would you have certain conditions?
Well, as any a reporter would have certain, if you like, priorities in working. So I should be able to examine those cases and situations I want to examine, whether it be on-site visits to places of detention, or meeting certain people, or being given access to certain kinds of data that might clear up a number of issues that need to be cleared up. So I think access to information, access to people, access to certain sites for inspection should become part of a program of in a visit to Iran.
Are you aware that whether Secretary General has asked to meet certain people and it's been denied?
I am not aware of that.
Okay. Any hope that Iran's chairmanship, the head of the non-aligned movement, might have any impact on Iran's attitude towards yourself and the human rights situation?
Well, it's too soon to tell what impact that would be. But ordinarily, if you are the chairperson of an organization, then one has to look at a very broad coalition of interests. And I am sure that in the 120 countries or so in the non-aligned movement, there are a large number of countries with who are what you may call human rights defenders, countries who are very forthcoming in the observance of human rights in obligations. Like India, for example, there are many countries who have signed on to a number of conventions on human rights, and are quite, if you like, observant in terms of the obligations under these conventions. So I think Iran's chairmanship of NAM does open the possibility that there will be members in that coalition who would want to urge on Iran, greater cooperation with the UN human rights machinery, and even perhaps greater progress on a number of human rights issues. When you are a chairman of a big coalition, then you have to represent the coalition's entirety. And I think perhaps it's what you saw in the speech by Mr. Ahmad at the UN yesterday, that the difference in tone and tenor may be because he was speaking as the chairman of the non-aligned movement, and therefore should embody in his speech the tone, tenor, and content of, I think, what the organization might have wished to be expressed from the podium.
If you have any specific comment on the references he made, President Ahmadinejad, on human rights situation, I would like to hear your reaction. And also, should we even read anything from this speech? Because who has the ultimate say in terms of the human rights situation? Is it Ahmadinejad? Is that your understanding, that he has a lot to offer in this regard?
Well, I don't think Iran is a monolith. I don't think the government is just one person controlled. It has I think a number of actors who are influential, and of course the supreme leader is perhaps the most influential person in Iran in a number of things. The president is an important actor in this, and therefore I think we should listen to what he has to say, and he also can be an important influence in terms of how the country responds to human rights issues. So yes, in that sense, we should listen to him. But I think many are mindful of the fact that his term at the helm is coming to an end, and therefore there would be others who would then take the baton from there. But we've got still several months to go, and I think the issues we speak to today can be addressed by him, and I would continue to call on his government to respond to those issues.
The major criticism is coming from Tehran towards you is the way you acquire the information. Could you give us a little bit insight of how, also about the recent contacts you had with the dissidents, and tell us technically how do you gather those information, and how do you make sure these are facts and it's not politically motivated?
Well, on my first day of work, I wrote to the government of Iran introducing myself and asking them to cooperate with me with information. I haven't received, you know, a response that will facilitate that so far. So I am open to Iran to provide me with files, information, data on cases of interest to me. In any case, my working method is that if before I make an allegation public, I write to them about my concerns, and they have a chance to supply me with facts. I write also after I have credible information with me. So, and I have not been proven wrong on information I have written to them with. So it's up to them to provide me if they have a different set of information on a subject with that information. My reports, before they become public or go to the UN for final publication, are submitted to government of Iran for their commentary. They have had they always had a chance to comment on the factual issues or accuracy of what's in that. They have not so far pointed out to inaccuracies in my report. So I think my reports are based on factual information, and I don't write everything I hear or I receive. I cross-check them for their accuracy and their reliability before I put them in my reports. If Iran's concern is that I am getting information from sources which they think are critical of the government, well, that's how human rights defenders are supposed to operate. You're supposed to hear all sides of an argument. You cannot just depend on information from a government. You have to have the other person, heard, and you assess what's been said. You check them for internal consistency or corroborating evidence. And if you believe that their unbalance of facts are truthful and accurate, then you use them as an allegation that is made. It's up to the government of Iran to respond to this. This is how the human rights mandate holders work. We look at facts, we ascertain their veracity, we look at the balance of probability, and if they are very high chance of being accurate, then you give them that credence and ask the government to establish the veracity of that. That's the working method. Now, if the information comes from somebody you don't like, that's nothing to that's not saying the information you get is wrong. I may get information from a critic of the government of Iran. That doesn't mean that the information itself is wrong. So I think they should respond not to who may be giving me the information, and in my case it comes from a variety of sources, but to the nature of or the content of the information that's produced. And when I say variety of sources, I mean people within Iran, people who have left Iran, NGOs in Iran, NGOs outside Iran, and by and large all who are either who can give first-hand witness testimonies or actually victims of the allegations that they make. So they have a right to be heard, and once they've been able to establish the veracity of what they're saying, they have a right to be written down in my reports as well. Iran does have the right to respond to this, and if I'm wrong, I would be quite happy to look at the actual facts and see how the actual facts then dispose of any inaccuracies that are in my report.
So the Iranian government has your upcoming report already. Have you sent any response?
Yes, I sent my report before I finalized it in draft format to the government of Iran. I was happy to have received almost a para by para commentary on the report. I do mention in my report the nature of the comments I got from the government of Iran. I think that's a step forward from where we were some time back. My first report didn't get a commentary. My second report didn't get a commentary before publication, but there was a commentary publicized on the day of the debate in the council. My third report did get a detailed commentary. I hope in the time to come we can have more substantive engagement in terms of the issues that are raised in the report. And I might also add that I am still, I still note that Iran has not formally shut the door on me. They maintain some level of contact, but they haven't invited me to make the country visit.
So you have contacts outside of Iran with the Iranian government. Is that what you're saying?
I have met with their diplomats in New York. I have met the ambassador in Geneva. I also had a meeting in the embassy in Geneva with members of the Iranian High Council on Human Rights. So I've had some contact with them, and of course there are still disagreements as to my working methods, and also on how I acquire my information. But again, I defend them by saying, prove them wrong. Then, of course, you have a case. Of course, Iran has been asking me to look into the question of victims of violence or other what they call a more balanced perspective on human rights. I agree, human rights are indivisible and as well as universal. So I am keen to look at all aspects of Iran's human rights situation, but my reports have a limitation of 10,000 words, so I can only focus on the most, if you like, concerning issues for me. But I am indeed concerned about all issues. So in the time to come, I'll be looking at different aspects of Iran's situation. And I do mention in my current report that I am concerned about reports of the impact of sanctions, and I would like to study them further because it's a complicated issue, and you need to have accurate information, reliable data on measuring impact and causation of those impacts. Again, a lot of it will depend upon cooperation I get from Iran in terms of being able to measure, assess on the ground what's happening because of sanctions.
Your meetings with the Iranian government officials have had any impact on the way you are dealing with the information? Have you changed the way you were working since you started your position?
I have been very transparent in my methodology and the way I work, and I have not been. I've been very careful with what I put on in my reports, and my dialogue with Iran hasn't advanced to the level where substantive issues have been discussed with regard to what's in my report. Now, quite often, what Iran tells me is that there are laws in Iran to prevent the kind of abuses that I include in my allegations. Now, that's what I'm saying to begin with. I'm saying the laws in Iran are sufficient to address a large number of concerns that are there. My issue is, what do you do when these laws are broken? The issue is not that the laws are not there, but even if laws are there, what do you do when they are broken, when they are violated? Now, I have not received feedback from Iran on what's happened when, if and when these are violated. I'm saying they are violated. They haven't told me what happens when they are violated. I think in the time to come, that's one area of discussion. I think for any country which wants to make a credible case for human rights safeguards, must address impunity. It must not allow, breaches of its laws go unaccounted for. And I think in Iran, that is what we would like to see more. That the calls for investigations in the past, for example, following the election violence 2 years ago, still have not met with a good response in terms of investigation. I think that has to happen, and we should see the results of that investigation. Unless you can establish accountability for breaches, then you can't have a stable, if you like, safeguards for the future. All countries in the world have problems with human rights in varying degrees. Some are more egregious violators, others less so. But all countries do have issues with human rights. But what we want to see is when laws are broken, what happens to those who break the law. So that is, I think, that's the true test of a country's sincerity and ability to address human rights safeguards.
You know that Sardar Jani, unfortunately, has shown no respect to what you are doing. Could you tell us a little bit about the nature of your meeting with Iranian ambassador in New York that you mentioned and in Geneva?
Well, I would say all are cordial meetings, and my concern is not that they are not cordial, but that they have not been able to address substantive issues. Now, the furthest we got was to a discussion of methodology, and of course, Iran's interpretation of my code of conduct and how I should comply with my code of conduct. I don't think I'm in violation of the code of conduct, but I think Iran has issues with, like you say, about my information sources. I think the point here to remember is you should look at what's been said and examine the merits of what's been said, not trust or distrust something by virtue of who's saying it. So that's very important. Even if your critic was speaking about something you do, you should pay attention because the critic may be saying something that's truthful.
I would like to ask you, because the issue of religious freedom and ethnic minorities, religious minorities has been discussed, but do you have information on the dissident clerics like Ayatollah Burujerdi and what's the well-being of these people who are actually might be considered within the Shia clerics, not some other religious minorities.
I am actually, I have spoken out about Atla Burjardi in my previous report to the council because I keep following a number of these cases. At that point, I wanted to raise concern about his health at that point. And you are right, in addition to religious minorities, there are many of the Shia clergy, as it were, who also are facing difficulty in terms of their situation, arrests or whatever. So that they're also on my radar, and I have concerns about their safety and their well-being, and the reasons for their prosecution as well. I haven't got specific information on anyone at the present time, but they are on my watch list, and I receive information about them. I even inquire about their well-being from time to time. So in my current report, I don't mention any of the Shia clerics who are in attention, but in the time to come, I would be able to address that issue as well.
I have two more questions at the end of this. It's, you know, the campaign of teachers campaign is going on. It's been started just a couple of weeks ago. What can you say about the imprisonment of teachers, status of these teachers activists in Iran?
Well, it follows two broad patterns. One is I am concerned, and of course, government of Iran may tell me otherwise. I am concerned that the reporters from the start of the year have faced intensified, if you like, persecution. A large number of them are in prison, 40 plus were in prison as of mid-year, and a lot have in fact left the country. These are reporters and bloggers, those who actually use various media to express views and opinions and report on facts and developments in the country. So that is a concern to me, because that reflects that if they are not able to speak out freely, then information about concerning issues may not appear. Then you have the human rights defenders who would typically stand up for your rights if you have a problem with the state. And if they feel they have been targeted for their activities as human rights defenders, then it speaks to also much broader concern. So both of these sets of people are those who will highlight issues and defend those who are in trouble from these situations. Now, academics fall in a different category. They represent perhaps a longer term, if you like, prospects for how people think or what people do in a society. So I am concerned when student activists or teachers who are activists are targeted and feel that they are being persecuted. Even from last year, I was getting reports of teachers with certain views, finding themselves in prison or facing prosecution, and that is continuing. And I think as we approach the Teachers' Day, there's enough about targeting of teachers as activists that one should be concerned about. And I do find that Iranian civil society is coming under a lot of strain from actions of the government in terms of the ability to organize, right to assembly, right to association. All that is coming under threat. And I think teachers are one group of very vocal people, well organized, well respected, who could challenge, if you like, the kind of ideas and actions of the state. So the right for people to challenge the views of the state is an important human right, and that right is coming under threat when you have professionals targeted, or when you have different types of societies targeted. And I think the situation of teachers merits some attention, and I hope that government of Iran responds to the kinds of campaigns that are now out there to raise awareness about their plight, so that teachers can go about their business and work without hindrance.
Dr. Shahid, last question. When we aired this interview, three of teachers, two of them who left Iran recently, Ahmed Medadi is in United States. The other one, I don't want to name him, he's in Iraq just a couple of weeks ago, and we reached out to one of them, which actually is in jail, and we spoke with him through his cell phone. Do you have anything to tell? Do you have anything to say? Because some of these 39, 40 people you mentioned have been sentenced from a couple of months to death. Three of them been sentenced to death.
Well, what I have to say is, of course, I'm very happy that three people were able to come out, and be safe. But I think it's important that the awareness of the plight of their fellow teachers is kept or is increased, because when knowledge of this goes out, then governments take notice. Governments also have many actors within it, and the more high profile the issue becomes, the more people in government become aware of this, and the more they can respond to this in a positive manner as well. Besides, it is important that a large body of countries also become aware of the plight of teachers. So if you have a problem, if have the issue highlighted, and have people become more people become aware of it, and I think teachers are a global community. It's a global community, and therefore I think they should try to reach out to the global community of teachers to express solidarity with them, so they can appeal to the government of Iran to address their concerns. So I think what they can do, what those who have come out can do, is highlight the concerns of their fellow teachers back home. So human rights defenders everywhere can address the concern and talk to the government of Iran about addressing their concerns.
Before I let you go, last interview I had with you, when we raised the issue of Rajai Shahr prisoner, you told us that you're going to pay more attention to their case. Is that what you're doing at this moment?
Yes, even in my current report, I have again, spoken about prison conditions. It's something that continues to disturb me. But to really do it effectively, I would need to be able to visit Iran. And if I do go to Iran, I would want to be able to visit prisons, without, if you like, prior notice. I should be able to go to prisons of my choosing, so I can have a look at the conditions, speak to inmates, so I can make an assessment of what is going wrong and make a recommendation to the government of Iran on what they may do right. Again, I would like to reiterate the fact that people like me, mandate holders, we work with the government concerned to find ways to address issues that are raised about violations of human rights. So my request again to the government of Iran is to allow me into the country and to enable me to make inspections of prisons. So if they have done something good that merits mention, which I can do that. If they have done, address issues that have been raised by the media or by the global community, that can be also recorded. If there are remaining concerns about the issues, that can be highlighted. And if they want support from other, if you like, institutions to address these, that can also be accessed. So there is merit, there is something to be gained by allowing access to these prisons and letting me see what's going on, so I can highlight the issues and even seek support where things need to be addressed.
Thank you so much.
Great pleasure.
Thank you for the time.